Having an estate plan is very important. It ensures not only that your legacy is protected, but that you've planned for disruptions in your health and well being while you're alive. It's part of making sure that you're prepared for life's challenges and the ultimate end of your life. But how you draft and prepare that plan can make a difference in avoiding problems when those documents are needed, especially your will. To tell us about how to avoid probate nightmares, I talked with certified financial planner Cameron Zabko on what you should do.
My guest today is Cameron Zabko, a wealth advisor and the founder of West Hollow Wealth Management, where he helps families, business owners, and individuals take control of their financial futures through holistic financial planning, estate strategies, and investment management. With a strong focus on protecting family legacies, he ensures his clients have a clear, actionable roadmap that secures their assets and avoids costly mistakes. As a certified financial planner with a Bachelor of Business Administration in Finance, Cameron has spent years helping families and business owners create estate and financial plans, manage wealth, and prepare for the unexpected. His insights have featured in NerdWallet and industry periodicals, and he has advised clients through complex financial situations, including business succession planning, multi generational wealth transfers, and high net worth estate strategies. Welcome to the show, Cameron.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be on here.
So, we talked a little bit before I hit record. I've talked a bit on the podcast about the importance of having an estate plan. And I had a guest on a little while back, an estate planning attorney, and went into that and what can happen if you don't have the right estate planning documents. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is, how things might go wrong, even with an estate plan. Someone passes away, that will then gets probated, and all of a sudden there are problems. So I want to talk to you about sort of the problems that can come up in probate court, as well as some ways to maybe go on the Wayback Machine and take some steps in the estate plan that could help prevent these problems from occurring once that estate plan becomes active and the will gets probated.
Mhm.
So, as the saying goes, no plan survives after the first shot is fired. Or I think it was George Foreman said, until you get punched in the face. So, even with a decent estate plan, you have all the documents you're supposed to, things can still go wrong when it comes to probate. So let's start with married couples, because that's, people
Mhm.
I often see in preparing estate plans and people that often seek out attorneys to prepare them because they often have children and a lot of issues. Uh, when the first spouse dies, what challenges can be faced by the survivor? And more importantly, how can they prevent that when drafting their estate plan?
Yeah. So I'd like to first start, how my interest in this topic came to be. So my uncle founded his own wealth management firm in like 1999. It's very successful. And then in 2017-ish, he got diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive brain cancer.
Uh-huh.
We had multiple advisors on our team. I actually worked for him at the time. We had CPAs, attorneys, everything. And we thought we had his estate plan pretty dialed in. As a business owner, is a little more complicated. And we had about 3 years to prepare for his passing. Quickly after his passing, we realized there was a lot of stuff that we either overlooked or thought we had buttoned up that fell by the wayside, especially when you're, in that process of grieving and dealing with a family member or loved one that's slowly passing away. And so that spurred my interest in this topic. So I think, number one, challenge that people face is that they think everything automatically flows to their spouse after they pass. And that's not necessarily always the case. So a good example I have is after my uncle passed away, my aunt went to sell her car. It had always been her car. She drove it and she brought it to CarMax, and the title wasn't in her name. It was in my uncle's name. So she had to figure out, number one, where is the title? And then she had to go to the DMV, get it re-registered, and then bring it back to CarMax before she could sell it. Um, Obviously, a pain, a hassle, but that's a very minor consequence compared to some other things that we see. I think much more severely, or severe consequence is a lack of liquidity. So if one spouse, and traditionally we see this a lot, is in charge of the finances and paying the bills and the credit cards and everything, a lot of the times the accounts will be in their name, right? And then after they pass away, their other spouse, even though they might have, a credit card that they use, the credit card was in the deceased spouse's name. They no longer have access to that. They may no longer have access to their bank accounts. So they might be really wealthy on paper, but they have no access to cash or capital, and they have a hard time paying their bills. And they have to wait for the whole probate process to kind of settle out before those assets are then transferred into their name. So I think ahead of time, something really important that you can do is make sure that you have access to bank accounts, credit cards, all that good stuff, so that if something unexpected does happen to your spouse, you can still keep the lights on, pay the bills, because that added stress during an already overwhelmingly stressful time, it really compounds and degrades you.
And this is one of the downsides. And I've talked to people in my bankruptcy practice, and I'm sure family law attorneys have dealt with this with couples. There are many couples who, and there's nothing really wrong with it. They just handle their finances of my money's my money, yours money is your money. They
Mhm.
keep completely separate bank accounts and completely separate debt. And one spouse, I'll take care of the mortgage and the car payment and food. You take care of gas for the car and all these other expenses. So that, although that may well work for them, this is a major problem as you described, because they don't have access to the money. And the shame of it is, at least under New Jersey law, is that a married couple, if both names are on the bank account, that account automatically goes to the surviving spouse outside of probate. So that gives them immediate access to that money, right? So I guess it's really how, as a married couple, you handle your family finances, and you need to be aware of the downside of that, right?
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really important point also, is that all of these documents are state law based.
Mm-hmm.
So if you move, if things change, you need to make sure that your documents are updated to reflect that as well. Also, something that I see, and this is, um, it's not as common, but I have seen it multiple times, is people are unaware that their beneficiary designations supersede a lot of time their will or other estate planning documents. And so after divorce, if they forget to, take their ex-spouse off their 401k, you could be disinheriting, your current spouse or your kids and giving that money to your ex-spouse. So that's another thing to keep in mind that would cause a headache during probate as well.
Yeah, because there are, and that raises a good point. I mean, in looking at this, there are assets that are um, really all a will is a list of instructions on who gets what after your death.
Hmm.
But that, but there are many documents that do that, and there are individual life insurance policies. Who's the beneficiary? Who gets paid out?
Hmm.
And although that may be taxable, depending upon the state, again, it's not. It passes outside of probate. It's a contract. This person dies, therefore this person gets money. A 401k may still be is still a taxable issue, but uh, that's going to go to whoever that beneficiary is. Uh,
Yeah.
or it could, if there's a named beneficiary. If there isn't, it could go into the estate. But as you say, life events, it's important to update these documents, because if you never get around to it, that person could end up inheriting money. Your ex-spouse gets the inheritance, and because they're your ex-spouse, there may be tax consequences to it that weren't were didn't exist when they were your spouse. So yes, the importance of updating things with major life changes is important.
Hmm. For sure.
So we've talked about, okay, how you set up your finances as far as liquidity or a lack of liquidity. And usually there is, and again, I've seen this in my bankruptcy practice. I usually turn to, I'll look at the couple and say, okay, which one of you is the treasurer?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the one that pays the bills. You're the one. You have a better handle on the financial information than I'm going to need. So what you're talking about is that the non-treasurer, if the treasurer dies, the non-treasurer can run into some serious problems, both with liquidity and getting access to funds, or in getting access to things like credit cards.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's really important too if you're that non-treasurer role. It's just understanding your household's cash flow. So understanding, what accounts pay bills, what bills are automated, what bills have to be paid manually. Um, that is a really stressful time, especially if you're not used to handling the finances. If you're grieving from the passing of your spouse, and then you also have to learn this whole new language and role and keeping your mortgage paid and making sure you don't fall behind on any bills and things like that. I think it's much better to get ahead of it when you have a clear mind, even though it might be frustrating for you. You don't like it, but if you have a basic understanding of this bill is automated and it comes out of this account, and that's how much money I have to keep funded in that account to make sure the bills are paid. It can relieve a lot of stress later on down the road.
Mhm. Yeah, and just knowing, and we'll get into this, with a lot of non-tangible assets out there that can run into a problem. So, are there any other sort of things that the surviving spouse may run into, or problems that need to be anticipated?
Yeah, so if you're retired, right, there's what's known as the widow's tax. And
Yes,
I
I was
think you were
getting to
going to
that
lead into
next.
this. Yeah. So if you're retired and you're both receiving Social Security, it's the widow's tax isn't an actual tax, right? You're not going to see it on your tax return.
Mhm.
It's kind of a term made up to reflect the fact that once one spouse dies, your Social Security might be cut in half, or you're at least going to go down to one Social Security payment for the surviving person, right? On top of that, you go from filing married to filing single, so you're automatically in a higher tax bracket usually, with less income, but your expenses don't tend to go down that much, right? So your lifestyle doesn't change that much, and then you also might have been dependent on the spouse that passed away to do, certain tasks around the house, whether it's lawn care or, household cleaning, groceries, things like that, that you might now have to pay someone for. So your expenses might actually go up, even though you're a single person now. So the trap that people fall into, right? They need sometimes more income. They have less money coming in from Social Security. So where do they pull that from? Well, most people retire, their biggest asset is tax deferred accounts like 401k, IRA. What they don't know is that it's really nice to put the money in and get the tax break when you do so up front. But when you pull that money out in retirement, it's taxed just like your income is from your job, right? So every dollar that comes out of there is taxed at your tax rate. Well, now you're single and you're in a higher tax bracket, right? And you're having to pull more money out of that IRA, and your taxes just keep going up and up and up and up. And that's the widow's tax that we're talking about here. So it can lead to a lot of issues with like keeping your assets that when you originally were, processing, can I retire? It may have made sense for the two of you, but now that you have one person, you're having to pull more money out of the IRA. Those accounts can get depleted much faster with those increase in taxes. So there's a couple ways to kind of get ahead of that. Number one, right, is making sure that your distribution planning is set up properly. So making sure that you're not just pulling all your money out of your IRA. If you have other assets like Roth, taxable brokerage account, um, different accounts that are taxed differently. We're doing sort of a combination of let's take some out of IRA, let's take some out of Roth, let's take some out of the taxable account, just so we have a blend of tax rates, and we're not just getting hammered on the income taxes.
Mhm.
Um, Number two is if you can start converting early enough money from the tax deferred accounts to the tax free accounts, that can really save you down the road. Because when you pull money out of Roth, it's tax free. So you can pull, $1 million out of Roth in 1 year, and your taxes are not going to go up in that year. So giving yourself the flexibility to choose and pull from different accounts really helps minimize that widow's tax that we talked about. And then I would just say be cognizant of the fact and don't be surprised, right, when your Social Security income gets cut in half or more when the other spouse passes away.
And my wife and I are going through this. But she's a federal employee, and she's retiring this year. And one of the things we decided on doing with her federal pension is opting for, we'll get less of a pension payment, but once she dies, then I get, I think, half her pension payment.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that could be a good strategy too. Yeah.
right.
I would say. before you make these decisions, so what we see as financial advisors in my practice, a lot of people will come to us either at retirement or they just retired. A
Yeah.
lot of these big decisions they've already made, right? So there's not a lot of room that we can help them make these decisions. So I would say for something like that, where you're picking pension payout options, that's something to get advice on before you do it, right? It's not just because you heard it on a podcast that it might be a good idea. You need to actually sit down and run the numbers and see, does it make sense? It's based on age, it's based on longevity, it's based on all these different factors, not necessarily it sounds good that half you'll get half the payment once she passes away. So I'd say that's a big tip for everybody out there is, make sure that there's some uh, evidence behind your choice before you go ahead and make that decision.
And you need to think about, like I said, we're talking about the income, but also the expenses, as you say. If you still have your mortgage, whether there's two of you or one of you, you still got to pay the mortgage. Uh,
Exactly.
I mean, you're going to be paying less for gasoline, less for food, less for clothing, less for a lot of things. If you have two cars and two car payments, you can get rid of one of the cars and get rid of that
Mhm.
car payment. And there are ways to downsize, and you might even just downsize your housing and sell the home and get something smaller. But you need to think about that stuff, and maybe before you go, just the spouses should talk to each other on, what's the plan once one of us goes.
Yeah. I would say a lot of the issues that we're going to discuss today result from just not communicating, right? A lot of people don't like to think of death. It's a very abstract concept. Your brain doesn't process it well. And so a lot of this stuff just goes unspoken and a lot of assumptions are made that, I have a plan in place, I'll be fine. And no one actually communicates this with their spouse, with the people that are, enacting their plan, like their executors, their beneficiaries. And so if you can have these conversations beforehand so that all the players know their role when the time does happen, it can make this whole process a lot smoother.
And you say you often see people after they've retired, so a lot of the decisions have been made. But I think the lesson here, one of the many lessons here for the listeners, is that one of the uh, life events that should trigger a review of your estate plan is your imminent retirement.
Mhm.
Part of your retirement planning should be looking at your estate plan, not just your financial plan, but your estate plan and how that's going to
Agreed.
affect. You say there are a lot of tax issues involved as far as what your income is going to be in retirement, what your expenses are going to be, things like that. So I would think you would recommend to folks that they see a financial planner and an estate planner as part of their retirement process before they pulled the trigger and actually retired, right?
Exactly. So evaluating things like when do I take Social Security, right? That's going to be different for everybody. That plays into, how old is your spouse versus yourself? Do you have other income sources? Those big decisions, once you enact it, they can't be undone. So you might, hurt yourself long term if you just jump to, oh, I'm going to take Social Security as soon as I retire. Maybe that wasn't the best choice. Other things like we talked about distribution planning. There's kind of a golden time frame between retirement and required minimum distributions. You have a ton of flexibility in the tax space where you could really do a lot of tax planning because your income is so low. You have a lot of flexibility there to move money out of the IRA, and take those assets out at a lower tax bracket. So if you miss those opportunity zones, right? There's not really going to be a time later in your life that you're going to be able to recoup those losses.
Mhm. And maybe looking at, this is more on the estate planning side of it, but on the financial planning side of it, but with a Roth IRA, because taking money out is not taxable, then maybe a rebalancing, if you have a lot of equities and growth stocks and things like that, rebalancing it into uh, income producing investments to provide, in
Exactly.
addition to any money from an annuity or a pension or anything else like that, you have this money coming off your investments and your stocks to supplement your income and expenses.
Yeah, very important. Not necessarily thinking about it in terms of a certain percentage of stocks and bonds, because I can show you a 100% stock portfolio that's super conservative, and I can show you a 100% stock portfolio that's super aggressive, right? And so really thinking about rather the balance of stocks and bonds is the purpose of the money and putting it into certain buckets where it's you like you said income producing, or this bucket is geared towards growth to help fight inflation and provide income later on. Yeah, so reallocating your assets around to make sure that your income gap need, that number between what Social Security is paying you and your expenses going out the door is satisfied, and that you're not really worried too much about market fluctuations at that point because most people's real fear in retirement, it's not running out of money, it's cash flow. It's how do I pay my bills? And so if you can solve for that, you can have a much more carefree retirement and you're not worried about the market going up and down.
So there are consequences. There are issues that need to be addressed and can be planned for. But sometimes, you probate the will and you get into probate court and you run into some problems. And what are some pitfalls of probate that could end up having the family tied up in probate court and delaying distribution of the inheritances and everything else? What kind of uh, traps are out there?
Yeah, and I know you've talked about this on previous episodes, but number one is not having the documents in place, right? That's the easiest thing to solve for. But on top of that, a lot of times people will have a trust and they won't fund the trust, right? They have this entity, but there's nothing in it. So that's one thing to look out for. If you have a trust and you understand how it works and you want to use it, make sure you actually put assets in that trust.
Mhm.
Number two, the biggest thing is going to be blended families. That can be a big problem nowadays with second marriages, and your new spouse might have kids, and you have kids with your previous spouse, and you might have kids together. Depending on state law, you can accidentally disinherit your children, right? And that might not have been your intent, but that's what's going to happen when the judge probates your estate. And so you want to make sure all those things are buttoned up correctly before the time comes that you pass away,
Mhm.
because no one wakes up in the morning and expects to die that day, right? That's it happens every day, but no one's expecting it to happen, and that's why people usually delay making these decisions longer and longer and longer.
Mhm.
And then I would say also if you have people that are related to you, right, that you don't want to have assets passed to them, making sure that that's noted in your documents, or that you have a way to pass assets like beneficiary designations that will, supersede your will, go outside of probate, so that these people that you don't want your assets to pass to can't come and contest your will and hold up the rest of your family in probate.
Mhm. Well, you mentioned trusts and funding them, and let's unwind that a little bit for the listeners. And that's one of the things I was going to bring up because one way to avoid problems in probate court is to avoid probate altogether. And
Mhm.
a lot of people have concerns with that, and they can create a trust. And one of the most common one, of course, as you know, is the revocable living trust. You
Mhm.
set up that it's a living trust because you set it up while you're alive. You put your assets in it, and it's revocable because you can always change your mind. Once you die, it's of course irrevocable, but that trust then takes care of who gets what because a trust document, just like a will, is a set of instructions on who gets what, and it can make things a lot easier if you don't uh, go through probate. Which brings up something I wanted to ask you about, and what I say to people about why they may need a trust or should have a trust is, for example, folks that they live in Philadelphia, but they own a home, but they have a vacation home at the Jersey Shore. Well, that's fine. Okay. That can be in your will and people can inherit it and everything, but you end up in two different probate courts.
Mhm.
You have to probate the will in Pennsylvania for your home there, and you also have to probate the will in New Jersey to dispose of the vacation home. But if you have both of them in a trust, then the trust can be administered outside of probate and you don't have that problem. So that's another thing that can get people stuck in probate court, right? Because they may have significant assets in different states and may need to be in more than one probate court, right?
Exactly. And then different states too have different probate lengths. I'm in Georgia, right? And probate isn't that bad here. It's, a couple weeks to maybe a month tops. I know there's some states where it can be months and months and months of probate court. And like you said, if it's out of state, is there someone, handling your estate that has the time to potentially travel to that state multiple times? And it's a bigger headache for that person, that you could have solved for, before you passed away.
Mhm. And that, well, it comes down to who you name as your executor, uh, or the guardian of your children, or whatever it is, that they are able to do the job, and you don't have a problem later. That and that they're responsible. It makes if they're going to be your executor, they should be good with money. They should be responsible people, because otherwise you get tied up in bankruptcy court, excuse me, in probate court, because the executor isn't doing the job properly. The
Mhm.
beneficiaries are up in arms, and then everybody's before a judge.
Yeah. I would say too is a lot of people, name an executor or they name a guardian. Hopefully with the guardianship, it's a little bit different. But with executors, a lot of people are named as executor, and the person that named them never had a conversation with them. So this, big job is now dumped in their lap, and maybe it's a bad time in their life and they don't have the time for it. So making sure you name successor, either executors, guardians, whatever it is in your plan is very important too, so that if that role can't be fulfilled, like you said, if they're not doing a good job, then the next person can come in and take that over.
Mhm. Yeah. So who you in your estate plan, who you name, some wisdom there that can avoid a lot of problems in probate court.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any other tips or pitfalls of probate that folks should be aware of?
Yeah, I would say when you're naming executors, guardians, all that stuff, a lot of people have a tough time doing it because they feel guilty. They might have multiple siblings, and one of them's a little more outspoken, but maybe not as good at doing the job, and the other one, is quieter, but maybe would do a better job. I would say ask yourself some reflective questions about the task, and people are going to be better at different jobs. So the person I name to be my medical power of attorney doesn't have to be my financial power of attorney. That can be multiple people, and you just have to pick the person that you think is best suited for that role. And don't worry as much about hurting their feelings. It's better for you and for your beneficiaries if you pick the right person, rather than trying to appease people and worry about them feeling like, you didn't pick them for this role.
Mhm. And another thing I want to get back to with trust, you talk about not putting things in the trust, just so that folks understand. Now that we're talking about a revocable living trust, you actually have to. You can say, "Yeah, this is in my trust," but you can and the trust document can even say that the stuff is in there. It said my home, my cars, my bank accounts. It can list all of that. But if you don't record a deed transferring the home into the trust, if you don't go to the bank and have the bank accounts put into the trust, it isn't there. And
Hmm.
that's something as attorneys and estate planning lawyers that we worry about, and say, look, I've done all these documents and everything, but and sometimes they'll pay me to record the deeds if it's a property in New Jersey. But these are the things you need to do. These are the things that need to be in a trust. And there are some things that really shouldn't be in a trust, like an IRA, because as I understand it, with an inherited IRA under the current laws, federal tax laws, you need to take that out within a 10-year period of time. And as you said, it's taxed as ordinary income. But that can be screwed up if you put that IRA into a trust. The tax laws
Yeah.
work differently, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's also, if you're thinking about, because those accounts are passed usually through beneficiary designations. And let's say, you have two beneficiaries and you want to leave money to charity. It can be really beneficial to not only your beneficiaries, but your estate in general. If you leave taxable assets like that, like your IRA, to the charity, and
Mhm.
then leave your tax-free or capital gains based taxed accounts like your brokerage accounts to your beneficiaries, then your beneficiaries don't have to deal with that 10-year, rule. They also don't have to take money out and pay income tax on it. The charity never pays taxes because they're a charity, And you can restructure it instead of just saying, I want my money to go one third, one third, one third. If you can pick and choose which accounts are going to which beneficiaries.
Mhm. Okay, so let's go on to the next topic, and something I'm sure a lot of people don't really think about. A husband and wife, they own a business together, and whether one of them is an owner or they're a co-owner, or whether it's a corporation or uh, an LLC or even a sole proprietorship, and they may even have adult children who have then come into the business and maybe part owners of it. Uh, what happens when one of them dies? What
Mhm.
happens to the ownership interest of that person when they die? And so you talk about a lot of the considerations need to be looked at. The term is called succession planning. Who succeeds in the business. You may say you could put in your will, well, my share of the business goes to my spouse, but it often isn't as simple as that, is it? To say,
No, yeah, definitely not. And I forget the statistics, but it's a staggering amount of small businesses either falter or go bankrupt after the owner passes away. And a lot of that can be solved with just simple communication. An easy place to start, I think, is getting a business valuation done and seeing, what is my business worth? Because a lot of people have this idea in their head, like, oh yeah, when I retire, I'll sell my business and then I'll live off the retirement. Or I'll have my kids keep the business running and it'll just pay me a little bit every month and I'll be fine. In reality, a lot of people overinflate the value of their business, right? It's not worth as much as they thought it was because they don't realize that they themselves are what makes the business valuable. And so when you remove them from the equation, the business doesn't run as efficiently. It doesn't make as much money. And so starting with that business valuation, you can really get a sense of, what is my business worth now? And then if you don't even have to hire somebody, but if you find a good business coach that can teach you, how to move your business to be more self-sustaining without you in the equation.
mhm,
That can help alleviate a lot of these pressures. So if you ever, get injured and you're incapacitated, or if you pass away, the business might not run at 100%, but if it's running at 80, 75%, it gives the business a little bit of a runway to figure out what the next move is, whether that's, looking for a new buyer. Is someone from the business going to step up and run it? Like you said, if you have adult children, are one of them going to take it over? That's a good first step, right? Secondly, you need to identify a successor, right? So if your plan is to keep the business running, you need to figure out who is going to take your place if you're unavailable.
mhm,
They need to know their role, and you need to start bringing them in so that they understand how the business runs, the finances, who owes you money, who's paying you, so that they can keep the business running as smoothly as possible. And there might be other, adult children in the equation that they don't really want to have anything to do with the business, but because they're your kid, maybe they are in the estate plan where they get a cut of the business. Well, in that case, what happens? Did they get a payout, right? That's not always an option for the children that want to keep the business running. They might not have the capital to pay out the other sibling. And so in that case, what comes into play is some life insurance solutions, right? If the company owns life insurance on the owner or key employees, if they pass away, there's an influx in capital, and then they can then pay out any heirs that might require capital. But it's like I said, it all goes back to communication. So sitting down with anybody that has interest in the company, whether that's, key employees, heirs, spouses, and figuring out what the plan is and have as good of a plan as possible so that if you're ever unavailable to run the business, that it might not, like I said, work at 100%, but it gives your family a runway to figure out what to do with it. So it doesn't die on the vine, it doesn't go away, and then that income source for your family is gone.
mhm. So this goes beyond estate planning per se. You say you hire a business coach, you figure out a succession plan so that you know what happens. Because if you're the person that pretty much runs it, you're the person, you're the marketing genius, you're the one that brings the business in, you're the whatever it is, and then you pass away. Well, that first of all, that can change the value of the business, what's being passed on.
Mhm.
But just to throw another monkey wrench into the mix, we've been talking about a family owned business that's solely family owned. what if mom and dad have a non-family partner? Now, does that what share of the business does that non-family partner get? Number one. Number two, what's its value? Because number three is going to be subject to inheritance tax in states that have inheritance tax, right? Because you have someone who's not a family member.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, that's definitely a more complicated scenario, and I've seen that happen, especially if, let's say, one spouse is heavily involved in the company, but the other spouse isn't.
Mhm.
So realistically, that surviving spouse can't just come in and run the company, right? It doesn't work. And now they have liquidity issues where they have to pay out the other partner because they no longer want to be in it, or that other partner would like to buy the business and keep it running, but they don't have the liquidity to buy out the spouse. Well, now your whole net worth for the surviving spouse is tied to this company. And there's no guaranteed payout that they'll ever receive a dime from it because if this partner runs it into the ground, well, sorry, oh well, there's not really any protections there. So that's really where I was saying earlier is where life insurance can have, a piece of that equation solved, right? It generates liquidity for the company. I don't sell life insurance, right? So I'm not an insurance salesman, but you definitely need to identify someone that has experience selling these cross purchase agreements, right, on the different partners and making sure that you're not just going out and trying to piecemeal this together because it does get complicated, like you said, with inheritance tax and all that good stuff.
Right. And insurance is a key factor in all of this because you could say maybe the non-family member can take out just take out a life insurance policy against the principal owner for a certain amount, and then they get that money, and then they turn around and, like I said, pay the taxes, pay off, you know, pay the other owners.
Or hire a CEO to keep the company running properly. So it
Exactly.
gives them a lot more flexibility, and they're not as constrained and forced into a sale that might not be beneficial long term.
And also, as we get into a more electronic age and a more complicated high tech age, there are many times that assets are just things you don't even think about with online accounts, digital assets, things like that. You said earlier that the treasurer dies. Does the other spouse know all the passwords to the online accounts to get access to them? Do they know where the accounts are, where the records are, and everything else? I often, as you get older, I've been saying to my wife, something will come up and say, well, what would you do if I wasn't here? We need to make sure that if I go first, what the passwords are, how to get access to it. We have a password app where there's shared passwords. If she needs to
Mhm.
get into something, she knows the password because it's stored electronically. She doesn't have to remember it. Goes back to communication. But I think you have a book, right? Who has the key to the safe deposit box? What's the title of the book? We might as well.
Yeah,
That kind
it's
of
called
goes to that.
it's called "Where's the Key to the Safe?" And I'll tell you the
Where's the key to the
backstory.
safe?
Tell you the backstory on that. So when my uncle passed away, he was the treasurer, right? He did the taxes, he did all the finances, he paid all the bill. Well, my aunt paid some of the bills here and there. But like the overarching treasurer was my uncle. They had a safe, right, in their room, and she was never able to open it because it was like it had a combo, it had a key, you had to get it just right. And she would always get frustrated. He passed away, and there was something that we needed. I don't remember what. But she's like, "Oh, it's probably in the safe." So we go to open the safe, and she's like, "I don't know where the key is." And we're like, "What? We're like, how do you not know where the key is?" So we like tore up the room, found the key, thankfully. But then that was the genesis of really the whole book at that point, because we're like, people that we had 3 years to prepare for it, but there's people like their spouse leaves for work in the morning, gets in a car accident,
Yep.
and they're just left like holding the bag. They don't know what's going on. They're grieving. Things get lost by the wayside. They don't have liquidity. So we're like, we have to make a practical guide for people like her in her situation where they have at least enough knowledge so that they can run the household if something did happen to their spouse. Um, Going back to what you said, though, I think the number one thing you can do is consolidation. So if you have accounts at, five different banks and you have a Schwab account, a Fidelity account, you have your 401k here and a random IRA over there, that can be so confusing for your executor, for your spouse. If you can start consolidating those accounts into, maybe one bank, and then one custodian, like either Schwab, Fidelity, or one of those big ones, that could make the process of getting those assets transferred after you pass away much easier because then they're only submitting this paperwork, with one custodian or one bank at a time, and they don't have to go looking for all these different accounts, right? So that's number one. That's the easiest thing you can do today. Um, Number two, I really like the password manager, like you said. I think that makes it so much easier. You don't have to worry about keeping a notepad and crossing out passwords and writing new ones. And as long as both people know how to get in there, I think that that's a really good tool, and it makes it protects you from online data leaks and crime as well, because you're able to come use stronger passwords that way because you don't have to remember them. You can also share that with the person that you talk to about being your executor, just so that they know how to access it. That'll make their job a lot easier. And a lot of people, what they realize, after the fact, after they lose somebody, they'll call the bank or they'll call the credit card company. And as soon as the bank or credit card company knows that the person passed away, they turn off communication, right? They close they pause the account, they freeze the account. And it can be a big shock because you're like, I'm just trying to access information that I need to do this next step, and they won't talk to you, right? So if you can if they have as much information like passwords, common security questions, right? So like, what street did you grow up on? What was your high school mascot? If they have a lot of that information, it can cut down on a lot of the stress of trying to gather that after you pass away. And then also what I've been seeing a kind of a newer trend is having, a digital executor. So if you have a lot of online assets, right? If you have a YouTube channel or you have, a big LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, all those accounts need to be like converted usually to, they need to state that the person passed away. So if you have someone specifically working on that, that can be another role in your overall plan, right?
So we talked about your book a little bit as far as what uh, had it got you to write it, the inspiration to write it. But what can folks learn from your book if they read it? And we recommend people, get a copy of your book and read it. What can they learn from it?
Yeah, so it started, like I said, as a guide to estate planning. But we quickly realized is that if you don't have a good financial understanding as a base, the estate planning doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so it then evolved into kind of a financial literacy book in the first half. So things like, how to set up your team of professionals, how to evaluate your team of professionals, why it's important that you have relationships with them. So you're not coming to them after the spouse dies and you don't know who they are and you're not comfortable. Things like your basics, what do you need in a basic estate plan? And then getting a little bit more complicated, when is a trust a good time for you? We talk about how to evaluate your insurance products. So whether it's property and casualty or life insurance and the different nuances and the different policy types. Um, we talk about, there's a whole chapter about business owners and things you can do to prepare as a business owner that we wish that we had spent a little more time on before my uncle passed away. But it's a very good base for somebody who isn't the treasurer, like you said. They don't know a lot, and it's a lot of powerful tools to get yourself into the position where you're comfortable talking with attorneys and insurance agents and financial advisors and CPAs, and you don't feel intimidated or dumb asking questions because you have the financial footing to poke and prod and make sure that your estate plan is in the best place that it can be. So it's a tool not only for, like you said, the non-treasurer, but people that have aging parents, that maybe they've broached this topic with them and they're being stubborn and they don't want to talk about it. There's a lot of good questions, like reflective questions in here that you can ask them, to start loosening them up to the idea of getting these affairs in order, and then also giving you the knowledge so that you're not caught off guard when they do pass away. That you're like, why did I not know this? Why did we not do this beforehand?
So that's a good starting point. People read the book and they know it makes them aware of things that they have to do or things they should do. And but what happens when they want to take that next step and you can help them? How can they reach out to you to take that next step and make sure that they have a good plan in place?
Yeah, so you can visit our website, westhollowwealth.com,
Mhm.
or you can email me, czabko, Zabko, at westhollowwealth.com as well. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. And then if you are interested in the book, it's available on Amazon. It's called Where's the Key to the Safe? How to Avoid Probate Pitfalls and Maximize Family Finances.
Okay. Well, I'll get all those links in the show notes. So, folks that are listening to this as they drive to or from work, you don't have to worry about writing it down. And you can reach out to Cameron and get some more information, some help to make sure that your estate plan works as it should and doesn't tie up your heirs and your family in probate court. So, thanks for coming on the show, Cameron. I'm sure we all learned a lot about how to plug the holes in the plan and do some strategic planning against the pitfalls.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Good to have you on.
Thank you.